Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you in this day when everybody in show business, which is technically what this is, finds an excuse to celebrate a milestone? It's a big one for us, Kieran, because this is the show before show 300.
That's right. Yes, 299.
Yeah,
which is probably about 297 more than we ever thought we'd get through. Because I remember when we first met and you looked at me and you thought, and I could just see that look on your face, like, why have I agreed to even talk to these people? Football finance. There's nobody interested in what is this? What is this lunacy? And we're still together.
Yeah, Kieran, that look on my face has more to do with the fact you had a Brighton scarf on and you were drinking a pint of lime and soda. That's what that look was about. It's questions day, Kieran, and we have some really fascinating questions today, but we also have a news story that's been going on for quite some time, and it was a big result for Leeds yesterday, a big win for Leeds yesterday, but a big defeat the day before.
Yes, this came from CAS, the arbitration service which operates across sport. And tries and succeeds in avoiding too much litigation, which can be very, very expensive. So that they do a pretty good job. And this relates to the signing or the non-signing or the potential signing of Jean-Kevin Augustin, who went on loan to Leeds in the season where they won the EFL Championship. And there was a clause in his contract that at the end of the season, if Leeds were promoted, Leeds had to pay, I think it's around about €21 million to sign him. So there was an obligation. And when we sometimes see this, and I know when Brighton had a player went on loan, Anthony Knockaert went on loan to Fulham. When they were in the Championship, again, there was this obligation to buy, by the sounds of it, should they be promoted. It's fair to say, I wouldn't say he stank the place out, but he came pretty close to it. He played 3 times as a substitute, didn't make an impact. And Leeds were promoted, but the loan agreement, by the looks of this, expired on the 30th of June. And if you remember that first year in which we had COVID, the season was extended because we had that sort of 2 or 3 month gap where when nobody was doing anything. We were uncertain about the extent of the danger of COVID, just how contagious it was, and everything closed down. And then football started to come back to empty stadia and so on. So the argument put forward by Leeds was that given that effectively the loan expired at the 30th of June, on that date, Leeds had not been promoted. And therefore, they were under no obligation to buy. RB Leipzig said, well, on our side of things, we see it as the agreement said, if at the end of the season, he's gone up. So this was the argument, and CAS has come down in favour of RB Leipzig, and they've said that Leeds have to pay the first instalment. So this has still got some way to run in a similar way to the tragic case of Emiliano Sala. So CAS came down in favour of RB Leipzig. Leeds are going to appeal. I spoke to some of our legal friends, and they say it will probably go around. If there was a hard clause in the contract which said that the end of the season had to be by the 30th of June, then perhaps Leeds do have a case. But if it doesn't, and also what happened in the rest of football. We remember talking about this at the time, that the Football Association, the Premier League and the EFL, in fact, practically the whole of UEFA, said under normal circumstances, players' contracts expire on the 30th of June. But of course, when the season hadn't ended, that meant that there were still some players who were out of contract on the 30th of June who conceptually might have to go and play 3 or 4 games. And this did create a bit of a kerfuffle. Many clubs, the FA said, if you want to give a 1 month extension, feel free to do so. And everybody wins from this. The club can still have the normal squad. The player gets an extra month of pay and so on. I think there were 1 or 2 players who were a bit awkward about this, but the vast majority said, yeah, we've got a 1 month extension. And given that was potentially the norm, then that could only help RB Leipzig and say, well, look, effectively, the football authorities have said that the end of the season isn't on the 30th of June by allowing this as a result of COVID. Then there's something called force majeure, which comes into, again, that's more legal side than certainly than my knowledge of finance. I did teach law very, very briefly with zero knowledge of the subject apart from having studied it for 1 module at university back in 1980. So my knowledge is a bit sketchy, but force majeure is effectively, is this an act of God? Could Leeds or RB Leipzig use this as part of their defence? So it looks like Leeds is certainly going to have to go and pay that first instalment. They are going to effectively try to override CIS by taking it to another court, and we'll have to await developments. But I think it's fair to say they will need an even better comeback than the one that they had at Elland Road yesterday in order to overturn this.
Yeah. I think to most of us, force majeure is what insurance companies use to not pay out, essentially, isn't it? A lot of
Yes.
times. It's a difficult one, this, Kieran, because it does seem to an outsider that Leeds are trying to pull a fast one. But on the other hand, they're trying to pull a fast one against RB Leipzig. So I don't mind as much, to be perfectly honest. Questions time. Before we ask these questions, Kieran, I'm just going to point out, and this is based on the conversation with a very nice chap who randomly approached me the other day to say that he listened to the pod, but he had questions every week that arose that he felt he didn't see that he could email them because we had such a long waiting list. We do have a long waiting list. We accept that. And I know it's frustrating for some of you, even though we joke about it. We are trying to get around to all of them. But if you do have a topical question, do email it in because the chances are we will look at it because quite often your questions based on stories that we've just done or based on things that have happened lead us down a new avenue. So please do send in topical questions and we will certainly try. Producer Guy does look at every question because every now and again, as I say, it does throw a different light on a subject that we have discussed. So we had so many tweets from Derby fans. With when you send out the menu the night before, menu's not the right word, is it? Well, the list, the contents that are going to be in the show. So many sad faces from Derby fans, the emojis. The first question, Derby fans, is about you, but only in general, and it comes from Steve Downing. And Steve Downing says, "I read that Derby County owed around £30 million in tax when they went into administration. I'm not sure if anybody knows that is the actual figure." But Steve says that's a number that's hard to put into context. What would the average annual tax bill amount to in the Championship?
Right, Steve. Well, first of all, thanks for the question. The total amount agreed as part of the claim between the administrators and HMRC was £25 million. And there were all types, and even when Derby themselves tried to estimate it, and this did cause my eyebrows to raise, they seemed to think it was higher than that. But the agreed sum was around about £25 million, of which a quarter, just over £6 million, was ultimately paid to HMRC. Although I'm hearing some very strange stories around this, which I can't go into, sadly. Oh. But I'll tell you about it after the show. So 25 million clearly is a lot of money. If we take a look at the total amount that was owed in the accounts of all of the Championship clubs, that came to 111 million. And the average, the median, and that's something to take us back to our GCSE maths, the median was in fact 2.6. So you've got Derby, which had by far the biggest tax creditor at 25 million. The median was 2.6. And to put that into context, and I've got, you know me on a Sunday morning near a spreadsheet, I'm as happy as can be. If you put the 14 smallest tax bills together of the 24 clubs in the Championship, they came to less than was run up by Mel Morris's Derby County.
Oh, wow.
So it was, well, it's not for me to say, because there's some very sensitive issues at present, which I'd rather not go into.
Okay, that's. I'd be, if I was a Derby fan, I'd be terrified now, Kieran. But
No. But this is all settled. There is nothing
great,
to worry.
right.
Going forwards, absolutely no problem. There seem to be some very sensitive people at the club.
Oh, I see. Oh, you've been getting angry tweets again, have you?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Well, back in the day, Kieran, I don't know if I've ever told people this publicly, but I used to work in. Well, it's so long ago, it wasn't even called Human Resources then; it was called Personnel. I never did get the hang of how many N's and how many L's were in it, even though I was a fairly senior manager. But I did the. It's whatever the professional qualification was called then, Graduate Institute of Personnel Management, but the statistics module just. Why do you have three? Why do you have average, median, and mean? Why do you have 3 words for something in the middle? Doesn't.
This means different things.
Not really. I mean, technically, yeah, but not really. Which is why I had to reset that module, probably. Anton Gallagher has a question about Scottish football and the economics thereof. Anton Gallagher says, in the SPFL in recent years, we have had to endure some clubs using artificial pitches like Kilmarnock, Hamilton and Livingston, which is a crime against football in my view. I think the word endure gave us a hint that he didn't like it, Anton. Many of these clubs have enjoyed inordinately good home records, while the actual quality of the games on these pitches has seriously deteriorated. I don't know who Anton supports, but I'm guessing he wrote this question on the way back from an away defeat.
Yes.
Actually, other than generating a home advantage, are artificial surfaces particularly good for cutting costs? Now, if I may say, Kieran, I don't know what they're like for cutting costs, but in terms of making money, they're very good. I guess that's one of the reasons why these clubs have done it, isn't it?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So I spoke to somebody senior in Scottish football about this, and the response was that the artificial pitches have been allowed in the lower leagues in Scotland for many years, as they are in the lower leagues in English football. And as you rightly said, they're really good in terms of generating revenue. People can hire them out. They can also be used for training for the first team squad, which means that you become more familiar with the dimensions of your pitch and where if you aim for stanchion X, that's perfectly in line with the 18-yard box and so on. And I know that some Premier League clubs who have the resources, what they now have on their training facilities is that the pitches are identical in terms of both the grass which is used and the dimensions to that of the first team, because they want to effectively try to create some form of muscle memory when players are doing shuttles, when they're aiming for passes and so on, in terms of putting weight on the ball. So it is something which is popular in the lower leagues. And what happened in Scotland was that there was a merger between the SPL, the Scottish Premier League, and the Scottish Football League. And that merger took place in 2013. And one of the changes, which was voted upon at the time, was that artificial pitches in the top division could then be used. Now, all clubs voted on that. And therefore, that's where we are, and the reason why the vote took place was based on the additional revenue being generated, and also it is a bit easier for the groundsman. Once you've incurred that initial cost of installing the pitch, there are pretty minor cost savings that arise in it. But I remember when Oldham had their plastic pitch. QPR as well. And I'd arranged a match between Oldham fans and Brighton fans, which was going to take place we were kicking off at 12:30, and we were going to play 2 40-minute halves, and we would finish by 2, and then the players would come on to do their training, and it was absolutely great because there was a crowd there, and I scored in the last minute at the Oldham end, ran the full length of the pitch to the 200 or 300 Brighton fans who'd wandered in by that stage, and gave it the full works, and then. As I turned back, saw the referee had ruled me offside. It's the fastest I've ever done 100 yards in my life, but it was horrible to play on. I've got to be honest, and certainly the criticisms which I think were levelled at the pitches in that time were quite appropriate.
I remember years ago the argument in Scotland for artificial pitches was that the weather in winter was more extreme up there than it was in most of the rest of the UK, and therefore more games were called off. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it's interesting that artificial pitches are allowed at the highest level in Scotland, because here, Kieran, they're banned once you get to the EFL. There's no artificial pitches, which is why clubs like Harrogate and Sutton had quite a delicate balancing act to do, because I think it cost Sutton £550,000 to replace their pitch, which it generated more than that in income every season. So it's strange for a lot of League Two clubs would still love to have that extra income that comes from having a plastic pitch. So when you've got a team that's in, say, National League South or North and are looking to do well, it's a difficult decision, because there will be people saying, well, let's have an artificial pitch and we can make £500,000 a year. But then they say, well, no, we want to get promoted, and then we'll not only lose that income, but it will cost us that to get rid of it.
Yep, it is a genuine challenge. But by all accounts, the quality of the pitches has improved. If you talk to, and perhaps we ought to get a groundsman on the show one day to talk about the finances of just how much it costs to run a pitch. But most modern pitches are sort of a combination of real grass and some sort of plastic grass. Anyway, I think there's and they are. We've only got to look at the ITV4 and the Big Match Revisited to watch some of the things that football was taking place on back in the 70s. And of course, we knew no different. We just said, well, it's the same as we got down the park, and it was.
Yeah, apart from the dog poo, that was the big difference.
Yes,
I think it would be a nice idea to get a groundsman on, Kieran. But two reasons pop into my head as to why it wouldn't be a good idea. First of all, it would have to be on a mobile phone, because no groundsman I know is going to take the risk of going inside and leaving the pitch out of his view in case somebody inadvertently walks across the corner quadrant. Secondly, I've met a couple of groundsmen in my time, Kieran. It's not going to be laugh a minute, that interview.
They are chippy, aren't they?
They are. They're like bass players and sound engineers. They tend to be the surly ones in any group. Although I have to say, in my experience, no one is more surly than the BBC sound engineer. So perhaps we could get one of them to hold the microphone.
They can have a scowl off.
I remember filming outside Fulham. It was a really nice sound man, but he was German, and he played up to every stereotype cliche about dour Germans. And the cameraman was Australian, and I remember the German chap for the about 100th time going, the sound is not perfect. And the Australian cameraman eventually cracking, we're under that flight path at Heathrow Airport, mate. It's never going to be perfect. It's just you just stand there waiting for this cross-continental standoff to end. John Vince has a question. John Vince is a Palace fan. Drinks in the corner of the Portsmouth Arms. John says, I recently listened to your very good interview with Keith Wyness, the former Aston Villa and Everton CEO, from a few months back. The interview was a few months back, rather than him being the CEO a few months back. Unless he's no longer the CEO, Kieran, I haven't checked. With all his experience, ideas and knowledge, he suggested we needed a Premier League 2. Would this just kick the can down the road and produce another Championship division with teams again throwing silly money to try to get into what would be Premier League 2 and then hopefully into Premier League 1? Could leagues going forward be structured to avoid this? And I think, Kieran, we've mentioned it's episode 299. I think it was in episode 1 or 2 in which I said to you that I thought a Premier League 2 was inevitable within 10 years, simply because of the amount of ex-Premier League clubs that are in the Championship. And I believe you disagreed.
Well, I disagree because who's going to vote for it? Because unless you get at least 14 clubs in the Premier League voting for this arrangement, it's not going to take place. The clubs in the EFL Championship are going to vote for it because it's in their interest. And I think we established it quite early on, is that everybody operates on a self-interest basis. When we talk about the demise of Bury Football Club, they were actually kicked out of the EFL on a vote of other clubs. And the reason why the other clubs did that in League Two, because they thought, well, if Bury kicked out, it means that there's only one club going to be relegated to the National League this season instead of two. That's just, if we kick Bury out, that halves our chance of being kicked out of League Two. So that's why decisions are made in the way that they're made. Would your club or mine, who are both quasi-established now in the Premier League, would they vote for something where perhaps we moved to a 75-25 split of money between PL1 and PL2? I suspect they wouldn't. Would the likes of Manchester United and Liverpool vote for it? Well, if it means them having less money, then I can assure you they would simply say no. That their argument still is, in fact, that they are the victims in the Premier League. In fact, they should have even more money. On average, they've got £300 million more than the other 14 clubs, and they say that that's not enough, and that's why they had Super League, Project Big Picture, and so on, which was to concentrate money in the hands of fewer and fewer clubs. I think Keith's comments and John's comments, do they have some validity? Yes, they do, because it would reduce the incentive for clubs to overspend in PL2 because the cliff edge becomes much smaller. And that's the issue that we need to address. What I think John has also recognised is that would we be kicking the can down the road? Yes, we would, because if we take a look at the distribution of money in the EFL at present, it's 80% goes to the Championship and 12% to League One, 8% to League Two. So there's already a huge gap between the Championship and League One. The creation of Premier League Two, which might result in, say, the average TV money going from, say, 7 million a year to 20 million a year, that means that the gap between the Championship and League One, or PL2 and League One, that would grow even further. And you look at League One, and you've got Portsmouth, Plymouth, Sheffield Wednesday, Derby County. There's huge clubs. One of the great things about football in this country is that opportunity to go both up and down the leagues. There would have to be a cut-off date. People would be fighting to be on the right side of the fence come that cut-off date. And instead of having the yo-yo that we presently have between the bottom of the Premier League and the top of the Championship, there is also a yo-yo. You think about a club such as Rotherham, which is always shuttling between League One and the Championship. Well, that would become the new equivalent of what we see quite too often, perhaps, in the Premier League.
Our next question comes from Sam Talbot, and Sam says, my question relates to the ludicrous bonuses that are in high-level players' contracts. Ludicrous to us, Sam, every day to them. Goals, assists, appearance fees, international caps, the likes are all included on top of the wages these players earn. How does this work for the club's calculations of things like amortisation of the player and wage budget of the club in general? Do the clubs assume all those additional costs will be added to the wage bill every week?
Right. What clubs do at the start of the season, and I think we had with some of our friends from Norwich on the show a few months ago, saying they actually work out two budgets. One on what's going to cost the club should they survive a season in the Premier League or get promoted from the Championship, and one if the other takes place. And then they keep updating them sort of effectively in real time over the course of the season. So they do adjust the figures. Now, when it comes to appearance fees, international caps, and so on, if you go into the small print of a set of club accounts, and I suspect there's not too many people doing this because they've got personalities and lives. You will find out. You are able to dig out some figures. So if we take a look at the accounts of Manchester City in their 2021 accounts, remember, this is pre the recruitment of Haaland. They said they've got something there called a contingent liability. Now, contingent liability is what the club might have to pay out in terms of these future bonuses. And they put them in the small print of the accounts because they say, well, we don't know what's going to happen, and there's less than a 50-50 chance of this potentially happening because the future is so uncertain and so on. In the accounts of Manchester City, this came to £227 million, which is effectively twice the annual wage bill of Brighton. Palace's wage bill is higher than ours, but it's not that far off twice. So you start to dig out the numbers. Manchester United at 112, and this will be either payments to previous clubs in terms of earnouts. If Manchester United sign player X and he goes on to win the Ballon d'Or, or Manchester United win the Champions League, then you've got to pay an extra so million and so on. And so the numbers can be quite astounding, but it does very much vary from club to club, and also the strategy of the club. So if we take a look at Chelsea under Abramovich, Chelsea's approach was, we just pay a flat fee. We're not interested in additional payments. So Chelsea's figure was only 16 compared to 227 at Manchester City. But that's more to do with Chelsea used to, because they had Abramovich's money behind them, they used to go in and say, we're prepared to pay you X. Normally that was pretty close to the asking price. And the other clubs would just say thanks very much. But that they are normally accounted for in real time. And what the clubs are obliged to do under the rules is that if they've got any potential commitments at the end of the season, then we have this thing called a contingent liability, where you say, well, on top of what we've actually put through in the accounts, this could be paid at a future date. And if Manchester City have to pay that £227 million, the chances are they will have done the quadruple and Haaland will have won the Ballon d'Or as well, which isn't beyond the realms of probability.
I like the sound of contingent liability, Kieran. That's what I'm going to use from now on. When people still sidle up to me occasionally in pubs in the mistaken belief that I know anything about the economics of football, and they say to me, what's going on at Club X? And I go, amortisation. And they go, oh, right, great. From now on, I'm going to say contingent liability. that sounds properly official. Oh, he knows what he's talking about, contingent liability. Speaking of knowing what you're talking about, Andrew Lee has our next question. And Andrew Lee says, for my sins, I'm an economics professor in Germany. I don't think you've necessarily been bad in a previous life, Andrew, to find yourself as an economics professor, or indeed in Germany. Andrew says, I grew up in Bolton. Oh, well, you must have done something terrible in a bad life previous life. That's a joke, by the way, everybody. I'm actually having to explain that to people now, which is not good for a professional comedian. There you are. Andrew says, I grew up in Bolton, and with Oldham's demise sealed recently with the relegation to the National League, I was wondering why there's been such a cluster of financial woes in Greater Manchester, such as Oldham, Wigan, Bolton, Bury, and Rochdale, and with Macclesfield close by in Cheshire as well. Kieran, having lived in the Northwest for so long, do you think this is simply a coincidence, or do you have a theory? I suppose my theory, Kieran, would be that the Northwest, being the traditional home of football way back when, there's just an enormous cluster of clubs in a relatively small area. Is it as simple as that, or is it coincidence?
It is. I mean, that's exactly what I've written down. If we go back to the commencement of football, the professionalism of the game was in those northern industrial towns, because what was it, under Victorian legislation that the pubs had to be closed on a Saturday between, I think it was 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. In the mills, people used to work 5.5 days, so they would finish work at midday on a Saturday, and then they'd have nothing to do because the pubs were closed. And people saw this. The club owners saw, well, if we have something for people to occupy themselves, we can make some money. out of people's pay packets, and this is how that initial enthusiasm in the Northwest started.
So if I could just, the important legislation was the one that led to the 6.5 days. It was 3 acts, industrial legislation acts, that meant that the mills, you couldn't force people to work 7 days a week, basically. So the mills and factories were shutting on a Saturday afternoon, which is why the 3 o'clock kickoff became so set in stone, because the mill owners of the North worked out, as they do, a way to, we can't make them work, so let's find a way of taking the money off them. So
yes,
they gave them football, basically. So, but at the same time, you weren't allowed to drink on Saturday afternoon either.
Yep. And as somebody that lived in the Northwest for 40 years, it's not an area of huge wealth. And therefore, if we take a look at all these clubs on an individual basis, if you're from Rochdale or Bury, you are very proud of that part of Greater Manchester that you represent. And it has a natural ceiling in terms of size as well, because you've got these different boroughs of the broader Greater Manchester area. And that means that there's a natural ceiling in terms of the number of people attending the game. And also, if you were perhaps wealthier, you tend to gravitate towards one of the bigger clubs to support, because from a hospitality perspective and so on, it's more glamorous to host something at Old Trafford or the Etihad than at Gig Lane, or I still call it Spotland, and so on. So those clubs have always tended to be cautious in terms of the spending. They don't have, by definition, a large prawn sandwich munching element within the fan base, because they are very much working class towns, and this meant that they had to mind the money. I think that there's also been very, very unfortunate, because we talk about the clubs going bust, but if you take a look at each of those clubs, the owners or the prospective owners, we had Steve Dale at Bury, we had, was it Lemsagam at Oldham, we've had the guy at Macclesfield who never used to attend. At Rochdale, we had people who were trying to hijack the club. Wigan was put into administration within 3 weeks of being taken over in respect of an acquisition of the club, which we cannot speak about as to the reasons behind it for legal reasons. So I think a lot of those clubs have been very, very unfortunate, and that focus, to a certain extent, is now shifting to the Midlands, because we've sadly in recent times been having to speak far too much about Birmingham, West Bromwich Albion, and Coventry. Yeah. So I think it isn't necessarily to do with the region; it's to do with the fact that those clubs were all based in the Northwest and all went through a series of owners who we could talk for hours about. And then we'd have to probably redact most of it to prevent a producer guy having a coronary.
I suppose as well, Kieran, I mean, people, it's quite difficult for people not from the Northwest to work out where each of these towns, boroughs fit in the conurbation, if you like. And I know Bolton, for example, wouldn't thank you for saying they were part of Manchester.
No, they're not. Absolutely,
they're not. I mean, but it's as I say, it's quite difficult for some of us outsiders to get in the same way it's difficult to tell where Manchester stops and Salford begins for people who don't live there. But traditionally, people would say, well, they had to compete with Man United and Man City, but it's only really in the last 15 years that they're having to compete with City, because until before then, City had their moments, in the 60s and so on. But City were in League One when some of these clubs were above them. So, but now what you've got is a whole new generation of fans from towns like Bolton, Wigan, Oldham, who are growing up looking at two Manchester giants, who are in the Champions League, who are bringing players like Haaland in, who are playing wonderful football. So it strikes me that it's not going to get easier for these clubs to compete for numbers, is it? They just have to find a way of accepting that 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, more so for Bolton maybe, but that's as many as they're going to get. Or they do what Tranmere used to do, and they start trying to find ways of playing on a Friday night to get the City and United fans who will probably quite happy go along.
Yeah. I mean, Rochdale used to do that because when I first went to Manchester University, which was 1980, I used to go to Scotland on a Friday night and watch the Dale, and then watch United or City on a Saturday. Because in those days, they were two of the cheapest clubs to watch. And you didn't need to buy tickets in advance, and you just rock up to the Kippax or the Stretford End and go and enjoy a game of football.
You didn't need two forms of ID to get a ticket. You didn't have to go on Wednesday to get a ticket for 2 Saturdays down the line. Having said that, they were violent, aggressive times. And the pitches were terrible. So let's not go back. Jimmy from Bath has a similar question. Jimmy from Bath says, is there a financial reason why clubs in Somerset underperform in comparison with other areas of England? Historically, Yeovil are the only Somerset club to have ever played league football. And even with Taunton Town joining Bath City in the National League South next season, that makes just 3 Somerset clubs playing in non-league steps 1 and 2. Neighbouring counties like Gloucestershire, Devon and Dorset seem to do much better in comparison. If you're going to talk about neighbouring counties, Kieran, if you could try to avoid Sleeping Giant when we get to Devon, that would be lovely. But again, it's a distinction that most of us, I had to stop and think who the clubs in Gloucestershire, Dorset and Somerset were. Not associated as a hotbed of football. Possibly, I mean, rugby was the main sport down there for a long time, you imagine?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I took a look at the population. So Bath has a population of 88,000, Weston-super-Mare 76, Yeovil 45. Now, our friend Andy Holt of Accrington, I think Accrington has a population of around about 35,000. Burnley itself has only about 75 to 80. And look at the proud history of that club and also the pretty cosmic football they're playing under Vincent Kompany this season. So it does seem a little bit strange. I think it's just a historical thing that those clubs in the Northwest, to a certain extent, had a head start, going back to the question that we've just been talking about, because they were set up in the 19th century with a view to professionalism, and that took time to travel south. And by then, a lot of the slots in the football pyramid were effectively picked up by the northern teams, and they had that impetus behind them. Cricket and rugby are popular sports in the southwest, but we've still got Plymouth with its amazing fan base. Although I think it could be argued that it's probably a bigger city than the numbers we've just been talking about.
It's a sizable city, and they'd get 30,000 a week if they're in the Premier League. More. Can I just say, I was so pleased watching the South Shields game yesterday. First of all, South Shields claret and light blue striped kit is a thing of absolute beauty. It's just brilliant to see Connor Wickham playing regular football at Forest Green. So I've never seen a player more unlucky with injuries than Connor Wickham. He would have been, without those injuries, he would have been, I think, 20 goals a season for Palace or whatever club inevitably bought him when he was doing it. So I'm really pleased to see him playing football again. And hopefully he will have a long injury-free career for the rest of his life. This question comes from L, just L. And L says, with New York City FC recently reaching the CONCACAF Champions League semis and Man City being perennial UEFA Champions League favourites, it seems that eventually both will win their respective Champions Leagues. Would they be allowed to meet in the FIFA Club World Cup, given the conflict of interest in sharing the same ownership group?
I think this is a cracking question from L. If we take a look at what's happened under UEFA, there was an issue, and we made reference to RB earlier in the show when talking about Jean-Kevin Augustin, that UEFA did an investigation, and by all accounts, I think it's for one of the RB clubs, the RB does not stand for Red Bull. I think it just stands for bull, if you believe that. To be perfectly honest with you. But that was the conclusion that UEFA came to. Now, I don't think that can be the case in respect of Manchester City and New York City, because they are both owned by the City Football Group. At present, the FIFA Club World Cup is not a competition which attracts a huge amount of attention, but it's certainly one of the areas that FIFA is very keen to grow, because that will increase its revenues. And you and I, Kevin, we're both old enough to remember what can happen when there's perhaps shared interest. So we go back to the 1982 World Cup and West Germany versus Austria.
Yeah.
That was an absolute stinker.
Shameful.
And for those people too young to know, in terms of that match, if West Germany won the match 1-0 against Austria, who I think it's fair to say historically close links to what was West Germany at the time, both clubs went through to the knockout phase of the World Cup. Germany scored, I think, in the first 10 minutes, and for the next 80 minutes, both teams just played tippy-tappy and made no effort whatsoever to go anywhere near the opponent's goal. So that was pretty horrendous. I do feel duty obliged to say that as a Brighton fan, we still have a huge conspiracy theory for the last Saturday of the 1977-78 season, where if we had to win and Southampton and Spurs were playing each other, and if they drew, they were both promoted. And they played out this 0-0 draw at the Dell, where there wasn't a huge amount of effort to score by either side. I'll say no more than that.
It's 1978, Kieran. Come on.
You're a football fan the same as I am, Kevin. If we can't have a grudge, what's the point of following the game?
I every time Dermot Gallagher's on Sky explaining some VAR decision, I just shout it in. Even now, so disallowing a goal in the FA Cup against Leeds United that touched the back of the net before coming back over the line, which, you're quite right. Paul O'Byrne has our next question. Paul says, it's always surprised me that the lack of chief technology officers or CTOs at football clubs. Given the increasing use of technology within football, training data, fan interactions, even shirt sponsors, why don't more clubs have senior employees in technology positions?
I think this is a valid point that you've made, Paul, and I suspect this is the way that football clubs are going to move. Football clubs are innately conservative, though, and given that the vast majority of them are losing money, to be able to get the chief executive to go to the club owner and say, look, we think that there's a potential good return on the investment if we get a CTO to come in and oversee all of our digital activities, would make sense. But in the short term, the manager wants a left back who thinks because our one's crap or he's got injured, and that becomes a more pressing issue. Trying to expand football clubs in non-football positions, unless it is normally in sort of the commercial department, is a real challenge. And I think some clubs, I think Manchester City are example of one, some clubs are very progressive on this, but there is still this innate, I can tell what a good footballer is just by looking at him, and I can do a deal with a commercial partner without really needing to look at it through a commercial lens, through a technological lens. Football is a wee bit behind the times, but I think it's slowly starting to realise that if it wants to expand its revenue streams, this is an opportunity that should be taken up.
We have 3 questions left, Kieran, and the first comes from Matt Greenwood. And Matt is pulling at a thread I don't want to be pulled. When you hear what the question, thank you, Kieran.
Very good.
And when our listeners hear what the question is about, they will realise how clever that was. Matt says, how come we don't see shirt sponsors on the back of football kits in England? I noticed that the Juve women's team have Allianz on the back of their shirts, along with the typical front of shirt and sleeve sponsors. If there are no regulations banning this, then aren't clubs missing out on potential sponsorship income? Well, Matt, if you want our shirts to look like French team shirts, then you can't tell what the colours are because there's so many adverts on, and that's fine. But I don't. But it's a valid question, though, Kieran, because there's a lot of spare space on kits where you could put logos on. We've got sleeves, which 10 years ago probably wouldn't have been happening.
Yeah, and if we take a look at the best sleeve deals, the likes of Chelsea and Manchester United are getting £20 million a year from those. So I went on to the FA sponsorship section of the FA handbook, and it says on the front of your shirt, you can have up to 250 square centimetres in respect of a logo for a sponsor. And as far as the back of the shirt is concerned, from what I can make out, it is allowed. You can have up to 100 square centimetres because clearly the player number has to take precedence. It could be that that's something we will see going forwards. You talk to people at both the Premier League and the EFL; they're always looking for new ways. I think part of the issue could be that perhaps the front of shirt sponsor, they are paying a premium for people to see their logo, and they might turn around and say, "Well, if you've got sponsors on front and back, then we're going to reduce what we're prepared to pay." So you could end up, getting an extra £5 million from a back of shirt sponsor, but your front of shirt sponsor says, "Well, we're going to reduce what we're prepared to pay by more than £5 million." So I'm sure it's something which is being looked at. It does appear to be quite universal across UEFA. I don't recall in any UEFA competition seeing back of shirt sponsors, although I must confess I don't watch that many UEFA competition matches myself, but I don't recall seeing any. And therefore, it might be one of those areas which needs to be addressed across the whole of Europe, and then a collective decision is being made. But I'm with you. I quite like watching Forest this season, because they don't have one, and initially it jars, and then you think actually, it's the shirt that you like and not the logo, with a few exceptions. I still think Pirelli on the front of a Milan shirt is gorgeous. But in the main, I find them pretty reprehensible.
I think the problem with the back of the shirt, Kieran, as well, is that because you've got the player's name above the number, and the number has to be a certain size, it's only really beneath the number that the logo could go. And with shirts tucked in, you're probably going to miss a lot of it. Anyway, people should be reminded, back in the old days when shirt front sponsorship first came in, Match of the Day wouldn't show. If you wanted to be on Match of the Day, you had to wear a plain shirt, and that went on for quite some time. And now we're at a situation when, as you say, you look at the Forest shirt and you just think it feels weird. It seems like a Sunday team have turned up. And that's happened. That culture change has happened in 2 decades, basically. And like you say, you now get fans who are nostalgic for logos. It's like the Palace Virgin shirt. People love it. It's really strange.
We say come back Nobbo at Brighton.
Well, see, why did you get worried that Guy would be upset that I said touching wood? And now here you are shouting Nobbo all over. Guy's eyebrows would be up and down like mine used to be in the first 2 weeks of this series. Our next question, talking of Palace, comes from Dave. Just Dave. Dave has put no surname, and we're about to find out why. Dave says he lives in Crystal Palace, but he's a fan of Brentford, and puts in brackets, "Sorry, Kevin." That's very difficult to track down somebody just called Dave in South London.
Yeah, so, Dave in South London, that's a rarity, isn't
it? Dave says, surely it's just a matter of time before a big club, and with due respect to Macclesfield and even the likes of Derby, I mean an actual big club, I would disagree with you about Derby, Dave, I have to say. So it's only a matter of time before a big club goes near to liquidation or actually into it. What effect in practice does Kieran think such an event would have on a general attitude towards sustainability in football? Would it wake people up in a way that only a shock crisis sometimes can, to the parlousness and utter banjaxedness, great word of most football clubs' finance, shock the Premier League or perhaps even this fated regulator into action, or as it perhaps more likely not? So what effect does he think it should have? Interestingly, Kieran, I remember talking to Alan Kirbishley when he was manager of Charlton, when Charlton were an established Premier League side, so this is quite some time back. And I remember him saying, and bear in mind how much football finances have expanded since then, he thought that it would take a Premier League club going into liquidation to wake people up to the fact that football finance was was buggered, and he named 2 or 3 clubs that he thought were close to liquidation at the time. So it's interesting that even then Alan Kirkbride thought that no one would do anything to put the genie back into the bottle until a big club went into administration or liquidation. Seems unlikely that it's ever going to happen, Kim, isn't it?
Yeah, and also I think the one thing that we've learnt from football clubs going into administration and liquidation is that we've learnt nothing.
Yeah,
because it does happen time and time and time again. And the fact that when we did the show last Thursday, it was literally a greatest hits of those clubs which had been in trouble. In terms of having a giant club go into this, what about Rangers? And what happened to them? And that was absolutely huge.
Yeah.
And yet football hasn't changed, and we see all of these other clubs getting into financial difficulties. We could have lost Chelsea 6 months ago if the government had taken a harsher line with regards to Roman Abramovich's wealth and they'd effectively frozen all of his money. Then there was a genuine chance that we would have lost Chelsea. Would we have learnt anything? I suspect not, because the culture of allowing clubs to run up huge debts, which are effectively guaranteed by the owner, is something that happens all the time. Hold my hands up. If it wasn't for Brighton's owner, we wouldn't be in the Premier League. He's put 400 million in, and people, as far as I'm concerned, and all fans are concerned, the guy walks on water. So, but it does increase financial risk. I honestly don't think that anything would be learnt. Portsmouth are the only club to go into administration whilst in the Premier League, and nothing happened then. It was just people say, "Oh dear, what a shame." It's more than what a shame, because as we established recently, the local suppliers who tend to offer more generous terms than they would under normal circumstances because it's their local football club, they're the people that end up losing 75%, or in some cases even more. I just think it's an industry which is blinkered, and financial common sense. Well, it's not the reason why you or I fell in love with the game, and it's not the reason why people buy clubs either.
Yeah, the problem is as well is that people find it's good. Like if that had happened, God forbid, and I'm no Chelsea fan, but I know many people who are Chelsea fans who love their club. If that had happened, people would say, "Well, that's a unique set of circumstances. That's not going to happen again because there's an illegal invasion of the Ukraine and they had a Russian owner." Portsmouth, when that happened, there's a lot of nose tapping and look at the people who own the club. So that's not going to happen again. There's always a reason why it's not going to happen again until it does happen again, essentially, isn't it?
Yep.
Our final question comes from David Gorton. And David Gorton says, "Living in Australia, you guys are a lifeline every week with your intuitive and distinctly amusing podcast." Thank you, David.
I thought we were supposed to be serious.
Oh yeah! Oh crikey! Yeah, we have been. We are. We get things answered eventually. We just take the scenic route. That's all.
Yes.
David's question is, and after that lovely introduction to us, I'm going to say, David, this is the best question we've had in 299 shows. My question is: with Brentford demonstrating a particularly successful transfer policy using the Moneyball approach, is there any reason that Manchester United couldn't follow a similar approach? Given the Glazers want to take out profit at every opportunity, would this approach suit a club with a bigger transfer budget?
There are clubs that take exactly that approach. I think Liverpool have historically done that. Yeah. They've used the markets to identify players at a younger stage. Certainly, if you take a look at the spending by FSG, who do come from a Moneyball environment in respect of Liverpool. Liverpool have spent around about £500 million less than Manchester United, Manchester City and Chelsea over the course of the post-Sir Alex Ferguson era in terms of player investment. And I think they're probably, I think it's fair to say, the second most successful team during that era after Manchester City themselves. Manchester City certainly take a Moneyball approach. I don't like mentioning my club so often, but this is what Brighton do. we signed Caicedo for 4 million in January. If he goes in the next January window, it's be 80 million. So we signed a player. We signed him at 19, 20. I think it's a case of spotting talent from different parts of the world using data. And Brentford have done this superbly. As much as I hate to say it, Kevin, I think Palace are quite good at it as well. You have been targeting younger players with a view to add on profits because you're getting them at a young age.
Well, that's a recent development, because for the previous decade, our transfer policy was to buy 29-year-olds and put them on long contracts with no sell-on value. It's interesting. You talk about using the data in a Moneyball approach, and yet earlier on with Paul O'Byrne's question, there's still a reluctance to use data elsewhere. But it's strange when clubs see that data working in terms of a transfer policy. Also, I think it's going to be very interesting. There can't be many. Well, I can't remember any transfer windows, January transfer windows that Liverpool have got into as a mid-table team, as they inevitably will do, looking at the numbers they've got at the moment. So it's going to be really interesting to see if Liverpool do what the rest of us do and half panic and splash out on players that they might not necessarily have done if they were top or second in the table, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I've known you long enough, Kieran. It took me about 9 episodes to realise that's how you shut a conversation down. Absolutely, that's Kieran's. Fine. Yeah, good point. Well made.
I'm just rubbish on football, as we both established. So now I start to get slightly twitchy.
You're not. You know more about football than most people I know. Thanks to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. It's very kind of you. And if you would also like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. There are still a few tickets left for the next live show at Plymouth Argyle's home park on Tuesday the 13th of December. You can go to Plymouth Argyle's website for those. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And as I said, topical questions are welcome. We'll be back on Thursday with a news pod. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, as always, folks, thanks very much for the feedback, and also, I don't want to mention Derby more than I have to, but some really nice things that people said that we do try to give an honest appraisal of all things. Patreon is one way of supporting the show. It would also be great to. We're getting really excited at the prospect of going to Plymouth next month as well, and if you want to support the show in another way, you can do that by going onto your podcast app and giving us a review, giving us 5 stars. It helps us in the charts. It helps us with algorithms and averages and God knows what else. And it doesn't matter what you say. Apparently, it's all to do with the stars. And you could say you would rather have the show presented by Champion the Wonder Horse and Jamie O'Hara. And it wouldn't make a blind bit of difference to us.
Champion's doing the heavy lifting on that pod, isn't he?
Yes, I know.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.